Because I'm literally a communist.
Hi guys, sorry about the delay in starting. I do apologise. I tried to, as you could probably hear, I was having some camera issues. But we're here, we're back again for the second stream of the day, because there was just too much to cover in a couple of hours this afternoon. I am now back for my requisite additional extra coverage that I did promise y'all. I did promise that I would come back and do some more content. Hi Curtis, how you doing? You also had tech issues on your end, I saw this afternoon as well, so it's definitely not been plaguing. It's definitely been plaguing everybody. Right, definitely been plaguing everybody. With that, I'm not gonna mess around. We've got lots to get through, so we're gonna watch some content already. So this is an interview with Andrew Feinstein talking about his campaign in Hobart and St Pancras. So let's just kick this off with some content, shall we?
Look, I think when talking about Gaza, there are a couple of things that happen. The first thing is to say, let's not forget that 76% of people in this country want a ceasefire. And not one of our primary politicians is calling for that. Not one. And that suggests there's a profound disconnect between our senior politicians and the people they are supposed to govern, or govern in our name at least. I think the use of abuse generally, including anti-Semitism, to try and ridicule those who want to see peace in Palestine and in Israel, is taking a very serious issue of racism and discrimination, an issue that I faced in my life, an issue that led to my mother, a Holocaust survivor, having to live for 3.5 years in a coal cellar. And every time there was a raid in the area, she was rolled into a carpet and the carpet put up against the wall. She lost dozens of her family in Auschwitz, where I've lectured on genocide. I've spent the last 22 plus years writing, making films about, talking about the global arms trade, about conflict, about genocide. I lectured at Auschwitz for the Auschwitz Institute and have written for them about genocide prevention. And because I care deeply for humanity, and I do not want to see an incredibly powerful military state slaughtering over 35,000 people who are defenseless, to be called an anti-Semite, given my personal and family history, it's really important that people understand how hurtful that is. And you know, I even had someone saying to me, and they claimed to be a rabbi, saying to me on social media, well, your mother must have been a capo if she survived the war, a Nazi collaborator. And you, of course, are following in her footsteps. That is the worst thing you can say to a Jewish person. And the astonishing thing is that sometimes it's even Jews saying those things. And one has to filter out the bots and all of that nonsense, that crowd.
Like, this is somebody with like an incredibly storied history of opposing things like apartheid, right? Like, people, like, the level to which casual commentators will throw around these accusations at anybody who opposes the current state of what's going on in Palestine at the moment as being anti-Semitic or whatever, like the Julia Hartley-Spewers of this world. Again, somebody as measured and thoughtful as Andrew, given the fact that he spent his life campaigning against apartheid in South Africa. Yeah, he was literally in the ANC. And so the kind of things that people would say about him for supporting the Palestinians is really kind of disgusting. About the kind of, again, it's become a canard the shock jocks will use and have propagated to cheapen this issue, to try and simplify a very complex discourse into East versus West, Jews versus Muslims, which is far more complex than that.
Our social media and pile on. But when you see actual individuals saying things like this, you worry what has happened to our humanity. You worry about how completely insensitive people have become. and also the sort of logic that suggests that you are only a Jew if you hold certain political views. You know, in my first ever speech in Parliament in South Africa, this guy from the party of apartheid.
I'm literally saying that reminds me of that viral clip of Luke Akehurst talking about Jewish Bolsheviks who've given up in his mind on their Jewish heritage. What it's all about, a bowl of chicken soup. That statement that Luke Akehurst made, like thinking about that in comparison to what's being said here. I've not seen any studies, Socratem George, but I wouldn't be surprised. Again, this attempt by some people to link the actions of the State of Israel with the international Jewish community, for example, all it does is propagate this issue that they are the same, which allows genuine anti-Semites who use the actions of Israel as an excuse for their anti-Semitism. It allows these people to get away scot-free when they really shouldn't be. Like, these people should be called out for anti-Semitism just like anybody else. Thank you for the 5 gifted, Andrew. Appreciate you.
The National Party started shouting at me in Afrikaans, "You communist, you communist." And I've never been a member of the South African Communist Party in my life. And eventually I looked at him and I said, "Why are you shouting at me like this?" And he said, "Well, you're white and you're Jewish and you're part of the ANC, so obviously you're a communist." You know, that was anti-Semitic, and he was kicked out of the chamber and suspended as a consequence. But people do that all the time in this country at the moment. And I don't know who appointed them the deity, that they are able to redefine who is and isn't a proper Jew on the basis of somebody's political views. Because unfortunately, that's simply not true. And so one of the things I want this campaign to do is to show people that it's acceptable for people to talk out in support of the Palestinian people, that it's acceptable to be critical of the State of Israel. That is not being critical of Jewish people. The State of Israel behaves in certain ways that I find abominable.
Thank you for the 10 gifted, Sharon. It was a 5 gifted, Andrew. And the incredibly generous £50 super chat from Captain Coconut. £50. Thank you very much. That's incredibly generous of you. If you've enjoyed my content since you came across the channel, the information you've gleaned from this time has been enlightening, and I've come to respect what you do. So here's a little something for your efforts. Keep up the good work, Helena. Well, that is incredibly generous of you, Captain Coconut. We appreciate having you in the chat. We appreciate having you around, and thank you very much for the very generous donation.
Independent parliamentary candidate, Mr. Andrew Feinstein.
We talked a lot about Palestine and what's happened, the suffering that's going on there, but there's not as much said about what happened on October the 7th. And you know, people criticise our letters pages, criticise our coverage sometimes. What would you say to that?
I think it's incredibly important that as human beings, we feel, obviously, for the people killed, for the people captured, for their families, their loved ones, their communities, we feel sympathy and empathy. If we can't feel that, we have lost our humanity. And it doesn't decrease your sympathy or your empathy for those human beings because you understand the political context in which that happened. The reality is that Gaza and Palestine has been under a brutal occupation for many, many decades. So to describe what happened on October 7th as an unprovoked incident tends to ignore the context. That doesn't excuse it. That doesn't make our sympathy or our empathy.
Exactly. Material analysis is not justification. Something that find it very important to impress upon people, that analysing the material conditions that lead to a certain situation is not an endorsement or indeed a justification for that thing happening.
Any less. And you know, on all of the platforms I speak at, I speak about all of the tragic events of Israel and Palestine. And I think we need to have that context. It's important to understand that the ever-rocketing amounts that we spend on defense, that we subsidize our weapons-making companies with, to sell weapons into these various conflicts. This is money that I think could be put to much better use for a lot of the real human security issues that face us, the climate catastrophe, issues like housing, benefits, wages, the requirement of new investment in the NHS, and all of those other things. So these issues aren't separate, they're really closely linked. And this campaign is going to talk about all of those issues.
Is this a local campaign just here, or is it? I mean, you don't want to prevent a Labour government. You just want to prevent Keir Starmer from being the Prime Minister? Or?
Well, let me be quite frank on that matter. I think anybody who understands anything about politics will know that the chances of the Tories staying in government are virtually zero at this point. I mean, they've been so incompetent, so inept, some would argue so corrupt for so long, that I think there is quite clearly a mood to get rid of them in the country generally. But you don't want to replace one Conservative government with another Conservative government. You want a government that is going to be about real change and that is going to focus on the majority of people in this country who do need support and assistance from a strong, competent, accountable central and local government. And that's what I want. And, you know, unfortunately, through...
Who is this? What they're about? This is Andrew Feinstein. He's a parliamentary candidate for Holborn and St Pancras, running against Keir Starmer, deliberately to try and ensure that he gets deposed so the leadership of the Labour Party can change to somebody who's not beholden to the right wing of the party. It's a shame that the talented people like Andrew are so adverse to running a progressive movement that is actually progressing, the Greens, and instead adopts an independent approach that has never worked in Britain. Our legislature is just so big, numerically, and for independence to achieve much more than sending a message. I agree. I think we have a real problem with the fact that so many independents are trying to run against Labour at the moment. And there's going to be vote splits, like there's vote splits in the constituency I was campaigning in on Saturday. There's going to be vote splits between like Green and Workers' Party and Independent and all these other candidates, based around issues such as like social issues, I guess, or people wanting to have their day in the limelight as an independent because they have a platform elsewhere, like the Ahmed Yacoubs of this world. But obviously, there are some of these people are going to have a much better chance at winning as an independent than others are. Like Faisal Shaheen is going to, and Andrew Feinstein have much more of a chance running as an independent than like Adam Shaukat or something. You know. And of course, I think Jodie McIntyre probably have a better chance in Yardley than Andrew will, indeed, in Holborn and St Pancras. If we can strike a deal, that would be very, very good. Yeah. We shall see. It's just that I think that existing within a movement that's already got a large platform, a large national platform, is always going to be a little bit more successful than trying to build up your own personal brand just singularly within a constituency, which is the issues that outside of the people like Faisal Shaheen, the independents will have a problem. Do you think any of them will win? No, I don't think any of them will win. I think if an independent is most likely to win, it will be Faisal Shaheen. Of course, that's a lie. There's an independent who will definitely win, and that's Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn absolutely will win as an independent. I think Faisal Shaheen has a chance, but I don't think it's a very high chance. I don't think any of the rest of them are likely to win at all. But then getting the message out there, showing that we can't just sit around and expect the Labour Party to take our votes for granted when we can find campaigns elsewhere.
Fucking neoliberalism.
It's going to be difficult to properly build a platform independent of a national party. Thank you for the gift, Viking President. Appreciate you. Sean has clearly indicated he wanted to work with you, but if it's up to you, would have endorsed him, but it simply wasn't possible. Yeah, because the Greens want to run in every single constituency, don't they? Leanne Mohammed is the one that you most want to win. I would have said that until Faiza Shaheen announced her candidacy. I think Faiza is the one I want to win the most, just because of how monstrously she was treated by the party. And that would really show that they can't just treat the left with the contempt that they've shown so far. But the one that would have the most impact politically is obviously Leanne Mohammed, because Wes Streeting is such a titanic figure in the shadow cabinet currently. And of course, Wes Streeting is a fucking monster. And I want him gone from politics forever, which of course he won't be. But if Leanne beating Wes Streeting will have the most political impact, I just really want Faiza Shaheen to win. That'd be more kind of viscerally, kind of emotionally pleasing to me. Even though I think it's better for politics if Leanne Mohammed wins. Because it feels like, given the rigging of the internal processes in the Labour Party at the moment, basically the only way that you're going to get rid of people like Streeting, like Starmer, out of their positions of power within the party, is if they lose their seats. They've rigged all the internal mechanisms so that essentially their faction of the party has dictatorial control forever. And so we have to fight whichever way they can to get them out of the party. Also, I think that I hope Leanne wins just because I think that she's just a really nice person in comparison to fucking that weasel Wes. Do you think if Akehurst wins, he'll get a ministerial cart? Nah, he'll just spend his time ignoring his constituents and sitting along on his fucking 85k a year salary on the public dime. Yeah, I heard that too, Lewis. Ronnie O'Sullivan canvasses for Faiza Shaheen? I did not know that. That's pretty cool. Always like Ronnie O'Sullivan. We shall see.
His politics, Keir Starmer has given so many indications that he might not be the best person to lead a transformational government in this country. And that's what the country needs, a transformational government, not business as usual, not just changing the tie of the guy in the suit at the dispatch box from blue to red.
Was it not the job of people to kind of stay in the Labour Party and if you're left-wing and win the argument, and if you want a left-wing manifesto, that's where it was going to come from?
I think it was made very clear to us that we were not welcome, first of all. Second of all, that our ideas, if they were what we could broadly call progressive, had no place in Keir Starmer's Labour Party. And, I've had to make this sort of decision before.
I mean, he literally said, the door is open and you can leave. Rachel Reeves said, if you want the policies of progressivism, we won't be doing it, but you can make your voice heard at the ballot box. Like, they don't want you to vote for them. They don't want you in their party. It's as simple as that. Exactly, we're the fleas being shaken off. How many seats do you think the Greens will get to?
I resigned from Parliament on a matter of principle because of massive political corruption by my own party, which I'd been involved with since my late teens. And that was an incredibly difficult thing to do. And people said to me, why don't you stay on and try and change things from within? Well, because it was made absolutely clear to me that if I stayed on, I would never be able to speak out about corruption in the ANC. I could talk about it in other parties, or corruption in our government. So there would have been no point in me staying on. So by doing this, I resigned from the Labour Party, not very long ago actually, primarily about Gaza, but generally about Keir Starmer's very restrictive and authoritarian leadership. And I want to give people in this constituency an alternative, an option that is fundamentally different to what Keir Starmer's Labour Party is going to offer at the next election. And there's almost the possibility that this could be a local campaign, and it will be grounded as a local campaign, but it might have some national impact. And perhaps if we see politicians around the country getting elected because the community trusts them, because their eyes haven't been lit up by the prospect of huge donations from incredibly wealthy people, but who really want to serve their constituents.
Well, at the end of the day, you got to remember, like, Gary Lubno is literally somebody who profited from apartheid South Africa, and he's the one bankrolling Keir Starmer at the moment. His own son is now the chair of Young Labour, up against somebody who fought against apartheid and the ANC. It just shows you where people are at, doesn't it? They could lose Brighton, but I think it's unlikely. I think it's unlikely. Like, if Labour had run a properly positive campaign and Caroline Lucas had gone away and they'd lost the name recognition, then I think that Brighton Pavilion probably would have been lost by the Greens for this election. But I think that there's going to be so many people, you know, especially kind of members of the queer community in Brighton Pavilion come this election, who feel like they've been spurned by Labour. They'll probably stick with the Greens anyway. Yeah, it is frustrating, Medea. I think Galloway will keep his seat. I think it's likely Galloway will keep his seat. It looks like Labour are running Paul War against him, and I think that given how rejected Paul War was, even amongst Labour members in Rochdale, I think the chance that he won't be good enough to beat a resurgent George Galloway, given the circumstance, I think it's a not particularly high chance in my mind. I think there will be a lot of Green voters who feel, they'll feel empowered to show up at the ballot box, given the strength of the campaign that we've been running and the positive policies that we are selling to people. I think that's something that's likely to happen. Yeah. In a low turnout election, the Green Party will certainly have more people who want to show up, who will show up. Plenty of Labour loyalists might not bother be turning up on polling day, especially when they look like they're going to win so handsomely, and plenty of Tories will feel disgusted to turn up and vote for them. So that's true. He doesn't need to connect with his constituents. That's true, but difficult to be able to connect with a constituency that you're running in because of the incumbent MP and not because you're a person from that area. The real fun outcome is Carla, Corbyn, Galloway and Farage all winning and having to sit together on the opposition benches. That would be very, very funny. It'll be interesting to see if the parliamentary grouping, if the parliamentary sitting will include when the Tory benches are the ones on the opposite side, whether or not the leftists will sit anywhere near the Green Party MPs. How many Reform seats? I think one Reform seat, potentially. I think it'll just be Farage and Clacton. I think there's a likelihood that they might get Ashfield now, just because there's this big vote split going on between Labour and Jason Zadrozny, and the Tories might all move over to Ashfield for Lee Anderson, because he's a high-profile figure. I do think that there's a chance that Reform win Ashfield, but I don't think you'll get more than one Reform MP, which I think my assumption is it will be Farage and Clacton. I think Tice winning Boston and Skegness is a bit of a pie-in-the-sky prediction. Even if Greens get 10% of the vote, only translates into 2 seats. Yeah, absolutely, it would probably only translate at least into 2 seats now. But that's a base that we've built. Those are people that we've won over now. There's fewer people that we have to win over come the next election to want there to be a progressive alternative, especially after 5 years of Starmerite failure, which we almost certainly will be seeing should he remain Prime Minister for the whole 5 years on the platform that he's got at the moment. The issue, of course, is that the mountain that Tice has to climb in Boston and Skegness is pretty huge. I mean, Farage has a big mountain to climb in Clacton as well, but the polls in Clacton already look positive for him in general. But Boston and Skegness, where Tice himself doesn't have a particularly prominent figure. He's not a particularly prominent figure, or a good orator, or a good rhetorician, or charismatic. To win over all of those Tory voters in Boston and Skegness without the name recognition, I think is impossible. Yeah, I saw Damn Girl, yeah. Clacton is very right-wing, yeah. I mean, I can think that there'll be a likelihood of Farage winning. Do you think the Greens should be focused on urban seats rather than the countryside? Yes, I absolutely think they should be focusing on urban seats. Yeah, I want to get some kind of electoral reform. Yeah, at least ranked choice would be better than what we have now, and then you can just vote however you want every time. Greens in second place on the under 50s is huge. I mean, it was one poll, but we'll see how that changes over time. It's definitely going to be, if not a breakthrough election, it's going to be the foundation of future breakthroughs. I think it'll be a very low turnout election for what it's worth. I think that every political party that's going to get a lot of votes in this election is particularly uninspiring. I mean, like even the SNP don't feel like they're going to be getting their base out to vote very much. Yeah, that is a problem, Lewis. So that's why I'm trying to build memberships in urban communities, get the word out to people. I mean, there were lots of people in Leicester on Saturday. That's roughly how I expect here. 6% sounds like the kind of place they're polling at right now. Again, obviously the only poll that matters is polling day, but we shall see. True, Emmanuel was there. Yeah, absolutely. Although canvassing in Merseyside isn't necessarily 100% safe, we have the highest rate of anti-gay hate crimes in the country. That's weird. I wouldn't have expected so. It's a very progressive area. It'll be interesting to see what happens in kind of. I mean, I guess it depends on which end of Merseyside. I'd love to go campaign for Jo Bird in Birkenhead because I think she's such a great candidate. I think that's fine. Like in Wales, you've got Plaid Cymru. Oh yeah, we followed that earlier, Renata. Yeah, per capita is important, yeah. I mean, to be fair to Aidan, the World Economic Forum isn't a conspiracy theory. It's a real thing that exists. But it's not a secret cabal of evil people trying to control the world through diversity programs. They're just capitalists who want more money for capitalists. Like, if your takeaway from the World Economic Forum is that they're like the Legion of Doom and not the, oh wow, supranational corporations have loads of control over the state because we've allowed them to do through tax cuts and through deregulation of our market economies and through global markets as well. And it's like, oh wow, turns out rich people can lobby governments as if they're like supranational entities, and that's a bad thing. But they're not evil just because they're like plotting in the fucking background to take all of your stuff. It's material relationships, it's material conditions. Yeah, 15-minute cities are a good thing. The World Economic Forum is just a trade union for the rich. I mean, it's just like it's like an international chamber of commerce at this point. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not particularly hot on Runcorn politics, unfortunately. I mean, ULEZ is a good idea, implemented badly, I think. There needs to be more suitable support for people on lower incomes to be able to transition into something that is ULEZ compliant, and I don't think there's enough support for these people. But broadly, clean air is good, and getting people out of polluting cars is also like a net good, so we'll see. Right-wing conspiracies are so great at missing the point entirely. Well, yeah, absolutely. Because again, right-wingers and liberals don't do material analysis. They don't engage in material thought. They just think that everything is about people in the background, in the shadows, planning things in secret rooms. I'm like, no, it's just material conditions. Just people responding to modalities and modes of human behavior. If Wes was beaten, I'm not sure if Keir would change course. He'd be so affronted he'd just point another storm road and double down on NHS privatisation. I think that's true. The McSweeney kind of Politburo absolutely would try and triangulate some health secretaries happy to do privatisation. But it would mean 100% less West Streeting in the Commons, which would be a good thing. Central government didn't provide a single penny for the scrappage scheme, unlike everywhere else a clean air zone has been implemented. I didn't know that there was that level of disparity, especially considering that the ULEZ in London was specifically rolled out because TfL funding was contingent on it in the DFT's funding of Transport for London. So Grant Shapps essentially forced Sadiq Khan to do ULEZ. I think he would have done it anyway, for what it's worth. But it's worth pointing out the fact that we have ULEZ is like where we would never ever had a choice around ULEZ is because Grant Shapps made TfL funding contingent on Sadiq Khan implementing it. So it was always going to happen regardless of what Sadiq Khan wanted. So you want to blame, if you really hate it, don't know why you would outside of like teething problems, if you really just love breathing in awful air quality, then you should be hating on Grant Shapps, not Sadiq Khan. Just been watching the Nick Robertson interview, and Rishi Sunak claims that 18 billion won't come from spending cuts but from efficiency savings through productivity gains. Well, no, I mean, yeah, that is a big load of porkies, isn't it? True, absolutely. We're allowed one, Wesley. What's the chances the Liberal Democrats could force the proportional representation thing through? Zero. There's no chance of happening. The Labour Party is going to have a gigantic unassailable majority under first past the post, and should they do that, there is no reason for them to undo the electoral system that gave them a gigantic majority. Like, we're not getting proportional representation. It's not happening. That's just Tory waffle for spending cuts. It's that what they were saying throughout the coalition. Well, exactly, yeah. Like, then what that means, if spending cuts happen, they'll just be able to say, oh, well, there wasn't productivity gains in the public sector, therefore that's their fault, not ours, that we've had to do spending cuts. Not that it makes a difference, because they're not going to get into government. I think the ridiculous majority they're going to get might increase support amongst the public amongst the general public for proportional representation. I think that's true. Whether or not that will actually happen, I think, is very unlikely. No, it's okay. See him. True, Socklam George. And if Labour at the end of their term are disappointing and look like losing, they won't be able to do PR because it wasn't in the manifesto and will be delayed. Exactly. Like, if it gets to the end of the the parliamentary term and it looks like first past the post are going to be benefiting somebody else, like Tories or Reform UK or whatever it might be. Like, Labour have no leg to stand on if they try and change the electoral system to make it more beneficial to the non-Tory wing of the electoral, the non-Reform wing of the electorate, and they won't be able to push it through. Like, it won't get through the Lords. They will blame the left if they lose the next election. Yeah, they should blame us because we're the ones actually holding them to account, unlike anybody else. Your favourite thing today was somebody calling George Osborne, Ed Balls, and Nicola Sturgeon 3 left-wingers. I mean, Nicola Sturgeon is definitely of the left. But Ed Balls, like, George Osborne is the architect of austerity. Ed Balls was the shadow chancellor who agreed with him on austerity, so... So yeah, it's true, it's not an issue. It's not an issue. Will Farage ditch his support for PR if his party starts to benefit from first past the post in some way? No, because I think that the more Reform UK become a force in politics, the more scrutinised they'll be. The more scrutinised they get, the less likely they are to win over swing voters who don't know much about them. And so their ceiling in terms of electoral numbers is pretty low. They've got a pretty low ceiling, is what Luke Trill was saying. So the likelihood from there, Reform UK abandoning PR when they've got such a low electoral ceiling, there's no chance of them changing their viewpoint on proportional representation because it guarantees them at least their core base of support to give them some sway in Parliament.
Because I'm literally a communist.
Will the Lords really stop it? If it's not in the manifesto, like... I mean, the Lords tried to stop the Rwanda stuff for ages. Well, I guess it depends who has the plurality of Lords in the Commons, because, of course, all of the non-partisan ones will want to get PR, like the Greens, like the Liberal Democrats. But obviously, it depends what the shape of the Lords looks like. So maybe the Lords wouldn't block it, but it depends on how many Labour Lords get appointed in 5 years. Yeah, George Osborne, he always does election coverage for ITV. Him and Ed Balls have been doing election coverage on ITV for years. They were doing it in 2017, 2015. In 2015 he ran in the election. 2017, 2019, sorry. George Osborne did election coverage for ITV with Ed Balls, his podcast friend. Podcast. Yeah, exactly, Salisbury Convention. Wonder if problems with voter ID will occur on the day and people prevented from voting lead to unrest. We'll see. We'll see what it looks like. It could be a very terse electorate come polling day if they can't vote because of voter ID. Right, leaks of the Tory manifesto here. Yeah, because this guy, like, fucking nobody wants to stand for him because they're as I said, the Electoral Coalition for Workers' Party is fucking ridiculous. It doesn't exist, right? As I said before, like, you have to be like a climate denier, anti-woke, anti-NATO, pro-Assad, pro-Palestine, like, pro-redistribution. Like, it doesn't make any, like, again, this electoral cohort doesn't exist for the Workers' Party. Like, who the fuck is voting for him? Is there any info on the economic class of Green voters? All I know, right, about Green voters in terms of their economic class is that when you poll people and their party preference by biscuit choice, the most popular biscuit amongst Green voters are party rings. Now, I don't know about you, chat. I don't know about you, but party rings are hardly the most middle class of biscuit. Although to be fair, it might be because they're vegan. Because Oreos and party rings both scored highly amongst Green voters, and they're both the vegan biscuits. Workers' Party is just a front for CPG-BML. The National Committee are all the inner circle of CPG-BML. I think there's been a split. I think they are less friendly than they used to be, but they used to be basically the same party at one point. But there might have been a split recently. I'm not sure. It's all fucking like Marxist-Leninist stuff in the background. Like they always split it amongst like tiny minor factual differences. The Workers' Party's coalition is made up of older religious men who voted Labour in the 90s, but even them are even those people are going to be like, at the very least, climate conscious and probably not anti-NATO. According to your conceptions of Green voters, they're working class people annoyed with the Labour and middle class voters annoyed with Tories. I mean, it's mostly young people, right? It's the younger demographics who will vote Tory across class barriers. Like when you're looking at the internal numbers of polling in this country, no matter what class you belong to, whether it's A, B, C1, C2, D or D1 or E, whatever it might be, no matter which part of this kind of rudimentary kind of class background that you come from, the numbers don't change. The numbers just don't change, regardless of what class you come from. There are like small variants, but broadly, the voting percentages broken down by class map onto the rest of the electorate. Like, this kind of blue collar, white collar, pink collar distinction about the kind of work that you do has completely broken down in, post-neoliberal Britain. Especially if you're a young person, like, it doesn't matter whether or not you work an office job or you work a tradies job or whether you're a carer or a nurse. You can't afford a house. You can't afford, to be able to raise a family on these shitty wages. Like, unless you're like the top of the income hierarchy, it doesn't matter what kind of new collar background that you're working from. You're all fucked. So of course you're all like more left wing if you're younger. And the same with older people. It doesn't matter whether you come from a white collar, pink collar, or blue collar background. You still get triple locked pensions. You still have defined benefit pensions. You still have the warm homes allowance. Like, there's loads of things that you get just for being older that young people just don't get. That it's no wonder that, regardless of class background, older people gravitate towards more right wing parties. I mean, I'm always happy for a bit of revisionism, George. You're a decently paid tech worker living at home with your parents, 30 years old. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was absolutely, Vicky. I appreciated it. In your experience, your local Green Party is mainly made up of middle-class voters who fell out with the Lib Dems. Well, when I was canvassing in Leicester South, it was mostly ethnic minority voters who'd fallen out of love with Labour. And in urban areas, it's usually young people and young working people who've fallen out of love with Labour as well. So it's a real kind of patchwork coalition of Green voters at the moment. So I want to make sure we have as many kind of eco-socialists joining the party, so it doesn't become just a fucking like middle-class, single-issue, woke party. I hate using woke as a pejorative because it's not a pejorative, but you know what I mean. Like, it solely revolving around foreign policy and social issues rather than the backbone of the economy, which it should be. Capitalism ate the middle class. It did absolutely eat the middle class. Speaking of capitalism eating the middle class, probably worth watching this Gary Stevenson bit on Pod Save the
UK's
UK,
economy,
because it's Gary Stevenson and we like him a lot on this channel. But of course, the rentiers and the asset owners of capital had eaten the working class post 2008. They'd eaten all the assets that working people were supposed to have. And now that they've consumed it all, they're coming after middle class people. And the middle class true believers in capitalism, they don't know what's going on. So they throw their toys out the pram, assuming it's some grand conspiracy. And I'm like, no, capitalism's just eating everybody poorer than you, and it's coming for you too now. Soon it will only be lords and serfs, and you will be on the wrong end of this, and you'll wonder why it all went so wrong.
Because I'm literally
Anyway.
a communist.
Gary does a good job of explaining it, so let's listen.
Video, we have economist, activist, former trader, and YouTube superstar Gary Stevenson. Welcome, Gary.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for this book, which we are showing in a very natural way. I think we'll agree.
Coco is behaving a little bit like Laura Linney in The Truman Show when she tries to seamlessly integrate an advert into the conversation.
Thank you.
Gary, our audience has been crying out for us to get you on the show for a long time, because your YouTube channel, Gary's Economics, is a great crash course on... Cash course is actually also relevant.
Yeah.
It's a great crash and cash course on how trading and the globalized economy works, and it shines a light on the sometimes labyrinthine and complicated world of economics. We recently had our very first ever guest who'd been on Star Wars. We think you might be our first multimillionaire guest.
No way.
We think so.
Nowadays.
Unless Monbio's making bank.
Monbio must be. These guys, you got one nice house in London, you're multi-millionaire nowadays, to be honest. I'm sure Monbio's making it. I won't point no fingers.
I mean, Gary Stevenson is somebody who's really good at cutting through the bullshit to people who think that, well, if they're giving everybody a tax cut that includes me, then I'm better off. And I'm like, no, you're worse off because they have more money than you and therefore have more leverage than you, right? Like, tax cuts for poor people don't do as much for poor people as tax rises against the rich do.
But you're one of the good millionaires, right?
I like to think so. You have to ask my mum what she thinks, but I try my best.
Just give us a quick sort of potted summary of your sort of backstory and what sort of led you to this point.
Okay, so I'm from Ilford in East London. I grew up in quite a poor family, a little terrace house next to the railway. I was always very good at maths, wanted to be rich and work in those skyscrapers that were going up in Canary Wharf when I was a kid. Worked hard at school, got into grammar school, got expelled from grammar school for selling drugs.
Really?
Yeah. £3 worth of drugs. I'm not going to make out like I was some sort of big drug kingpin. Kept working hard, managed to get into LSE. Yeah. London School of Economics, those don't know, very fancy economics school. Everyone there was mad about becoming a trader. And I was studying maths and economics. I just thought I'll get good grades, get a job. Turns out that's not enough, basically, because the way you get jobs nowadays, you have to apply for 57 internships at 57 investment banks in your second year before you've got your grades. So you have to send off all these CVs and cover letters. And basically, I had no chance of getting in.
It is really funny when people try and say, the NHS spends all this money it doesn't need to spend. And I'm just like, I'm sure you're an expert on the inner workings of the NHS budget. I'm sure that you just think that every single government department is just an inefficient waste of money when, of course, we actually have one of the most efficient healthcare systems in the world and has been for ages. And it's just the George Osborne cuts fucked it over as soon as the pandemic happened. We weren't prepared. Sorry.
And I found out that Citibank...
It literally did work throughout the entire Blair administration.
Hire one trader through a card game, which is basically a maths game. And I entered that game. I won that game. I become interest rates trader for Citibank in 2008. The world immediately blows up. And suddenly, bizarrely, everyone in my department starts making an enormous amount of money. I get involved. I start making a bit of money as well. In 2011, I come to the belief that basically the global economy will collapse forever because of what I believe is a growing problem of wealth inequality. So I start betting the global economy will collapse forever, and then in 2011, I become Citibank's most profitable trader in the world. In 2011, I turned 25, so I was still a very young man. And, that got me thinking, maybe we should try and stop the global economy from collapsing, which is what I'm doing now.
It is mad. So, I went to school in Dagenham.
Okay,
so
down the road.
And that, you painted that image there about being in the shadow of Canary Wharf. Definitely growing up in East London, that juxtaposition of the massively wealthy and the very, very poor is so striking. It's absolutely everywhere. Yeah. And I guess having been on both sides of it, I suppose what I'm getting at is like you've seen To the Heart of Darkness, I guess you could say.
I've been in there. Yeah, I've been writing. It's a weird place to trade for, especially my job, where basically what you're betting on is the economy going to be good or is the economy going to be bad? Because obviously some of us, including me, come to the conclusion the economy is going to be bad. And you might, we're paid millions of pounds a year, right? You might think if you're paid millions of pounds a year to work out if the economy is going to be bad, and you think the economy is going to be bad, your job should then be to stop the economy from being bad. But it's just not. Your job is just to bet on it, just straight out to bet on it. And it's a strange thing to experience, but the fact is that is how we structured the world.
So going into this election, you've been calling for some pretty sort of substantial reforms, and specifically a wealth tax. Can you just outline what that wealth tax would look like?
So what we campaign from part of a group called Patriotic Millionaires. I didn't make the name up, but I think it works. We campaign for wealth taxes on wealth of above £10 million. Yeah. So we're not after your nan's house. Unless your nan is worth more than £10 million, which I don't know is possible.
Well, my nan's a Rockefeller, so
we think wealth of above £10 million. We campaign for 1% tax on wealth above £10 million. So if you're worth £20 million, you'd be paying £100,000 a year. To be honest, I don't think it's a massive ask for people with that level of wealth. You've got to consider these guys make 5% a year on their wealth. The reason I campaign for that is because I've made a ton of money betting that if you don't deal with wealth inequality, it will grow really, really quickly. If wealth inequality grows quickly, that means the rich getting richer and ordinary people getting poorer. It's, the wealth doesn't come from nowhere. What we've seen in the last sort of 5-6 years, this massive collapse in living standards. We've seen this massive collapse in the ability of young people to buy property, massive increase in government debt, massive increase in household debt, at the exact same time as this massive increase in millionaire and billionaire wealth. Listen, if these guys get richer, they're getting richer by buying the assets that your kids need, the houses that your kids need. And I think if you don't do anything about it, over time, they will own more.
Because it used to just be the houses of working class people, right? It used to just be working people's houses that they were buying out in the post-financial crash world. And then, of course, we gave out, all this money without taxing it back during the pandemic, during like the stimulus in that period. And then they are now taking all this extra liquidity, pouring it into the housing market, and it's now going to be taking houses away from middle-class kids as well as working-class kids, right? And again, that's why this bubble was allowed to exist for so long throughout the austerity years under George Osborne and David Cameron, because the middle-class people who made up their voter base didn't fucking care that working-class people weren't getting on the housing ladder.
More and more of the country, more and more of the houses, and we will be forced to go further and further into debt just to live.
I hold my hands up and say that I don't feel very learned around the economics. The economics, that's what I just said. I said the economics. I think I've revealed myself there.
I feel like Justin Timberlake in the Social Network. Drop the V.
Yeah.
It's cleaner.
And I think sometimes the language is intentionally obscure so that average people can't understand it and therefore can't participate in it. In the spirit of that, I wonder, could you please explain to me the logic of Rachel Reeves saying that they wouldn't apply a wealth tax?
Obviously, I try and talk to the Labour Party and I try and lobby the Labour Party. I would talk to the Conservatives if they would talk to me. So far, nobody's reached out.
That's not surprising.
Some people in the Labour Party, and I haven't spoken to Rachel Reeves specifically, they will say to me privately, we think inequality is a big problem, but we think wealth tax is not a vote winner. Because people hate taxes. Even if we say it's tax above £10 million, they're scared that the British public won't accept it. And, I'm not sure that is true. And of course, we could speculate whether they're worried about whether their donors will accept it. I couldn't say whether that is.
I mean, that's exactly where it's the donors that are the problem here. Like, I don't think necessarily given the state of the Conservative Party, they would lose the election if they decided to do a wealth tax on people with £10 million in assets or more. It's interesting, the wealth tax that Gary Stevenson is advocating for here is exactly the one the Greens are running on.
But what they tell me, not Rachel Reeves, but other people in the Labour Party, is they think it's unpopular.
So there's no economic reason for it. There's no, issue that would occur economically if we had this wealth tax.
I mean, some people will make arguments, of course. The classic argument is if you tax them, they'll leave, or it will affect investment. I don't think these cut the mustard, to be honest. I think what we need is their assets. We need these assets. If they leave, we can still tax the assets. If giving rich people a ton of money led to high investment, then we'd be investing our tits off right now, and we're not. So I don't think that works. Listen, the problem is, at the end of the day, if you're an economist, you can work as a trade, you get paid £2 million a year. If you're working in talking publicly, somebody needs to fund you. So I go on radio stations, and for years I went on radio for free talking about economics. Who am I coming up against? Someone from the IEA, Institute of Economic Affairs.
And just contextualise what that is. We talk about it so often.
That is a think tank. There's a group of think tanks which are sort of near Westminster. They talked about as the Tufton Street think tanks. They're funded by billionaires. And they give them sensible names such as, Taxpayers Alliance, Institute for Economic Affairs.
I mean, whilst I will say that Rishi Sunak is not more of a warmonger than Blair is, Rishi Sunak is still selling weapons to a genocidal ethno-state.
Billionaires paying money for people like me to go on TV and radio and say, whatever you do, don't tax the rich because it's bad for you. So a lot of rich people pay a lot of money to tell you that it's bad for you. And what they want people to hear when I say tax the rich is we want to tax you, we want to tax your nan, we want to tax your mum. And, that's, this is the why it's become unpopular. And this is what I'm trying to fight against.
But according to a YouGov poll, 78% of the British electorate support a wealth tax. That's a YouGov poll that was conducted in January of this year. We talked to Kat Hobbs earlier about renationalisation and renationalisation of things like the railways, the water, protecting the National Health Service from encroaching privatisation. These are all potential vote winners if you consult any of the polling.
I think we are increasingly winning the public argument. I think part of the problem is with economics as discipline. I think that there's been a narrowing of what is considered acceptable and sensible economics. And, in the 60s...
My neighbour, a nurse who's completely ignorant to politics, said today Labour are the party that will tax her more. Well, exactly, that's the fucking lies that Sunak was happy to trot out, right?
60s and 70s, tax rates are much higher on the very rich. Of course, the Beatles famously sang, it's one for you, 19 for me, because they paid 95% income tax. And I'm not saying I want a 95% income tax, but it wasn't that long ago that we lived in a country and a continent, to be honest, where the rich paid very high rates of tax and ordinary people, like my dad worked for the post office, could afford a house and a family and these things.
Thank you, Kim Eternal, for the 5 gifted. Appreciate you. Your job NHS went in an early round of outsourced privatisation in 1990. Eventually, they replaced hospital catering with cost-a-ton coffee. theatre sterilising went private too, and departments shut with the land flogged off. Yeah, literally, that's the world of privatisation, right? The monster of
neoliberalism.
capital will eat through every public asset that we collectively own until there's nothing left.
Have gone, basically. Yeah. But the window of acceptability has changed. You know, and if you were to say we want to even raise tax on the very, very rich to 70, 80%, people say that's insane. And I think the problem is coming really out of the discipline of economics. And I think there's too many economists are very, very narrow-minded in the way they see the world. And also, they don't get punished if they're wrong. They don't get. So I was a trader, right? And as a trader, you have to be right or you lose your job. You see what I'm saying? But look at what the last sort of 5 or 6 prime ministers have done to the country. David Cameron makes 10 million quid today, a year after leaving office, working in finance. He must be a great financier. Boris Johnson's going to be making time. Rishi Sunak's father is literally a billionaire. So I think the problem you have is that these economists, they've really narrowed their idea of what's acceptable.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously you're a Reform UK supporter, right? Obviously I'm debating somebody in chat now. I do apologise for pausing too much to not talk about the video. But you understand that we hate Blair. Do you understand why we hate Blair? Because we hate Blair for far more than just the Iraq War. The Iraq War was bad, right? But we hate Blair for plenty more reasons than just Iraq. There are plenty of reasons that we hate Blair, but what do you think that leftists hate about Blair, Aidan? What do you think that we really hate about him? I'd be interested to think I'd be interested to find out what you think we hate about him. It's really interesting to understand your perspective.
And things get worse year after year for ordinary people, but for them it gets better. So we've kind of handed over the keys of the castle to guys who are robbing it blind, and they've got no reason to stop.
And I would say that I would definitely say, if listeners haven't listened to the episode we did with George Monbiot, who we, and I should be clear, falsely accused of being a multimillionaire earlier in the episode, but George talks a lot and has written a whole book about this idea of neoliberalism and the elimination of diversity in economic thought, and where the sort of teachings espoused by Hayek and Milton Friedman that were then popularised by Reagan and Thatcher have now become what we think of as economics, and there is no space for any alternative perspectives to be discussed. But also, a lot of these privatised industries, again, just to sort of bring it back to the subject of nationalisation, a lot of these privatised industries are not being allowed to fail in the way that they should be if we live in a free market economy. You know, the train companies collapse, but then they have to be saved by government funding because we need trains. The water companies, Thames Water is constantly on the brink of administration. It may well go into administration later in this year. We need water to come out of our taps. So the companies themselves are not actually punished. The shareholders who make money from the dividends from these companies are not being punished.
This is one to understand. This is what is called an inelastic market. So both the supply and the demand are inelastic. People cannot survive without water. You cannot reduce your water consumption in response to lower supply. The demand is completely inelastic. But the supply is also inelastic as well, because it's a natural monopoly. I actually thought you hated him for the war. Enlighten you, though, he definitely would have got the wars he got. He also sent us to Afghanistan. I asked my uncle when I was a young person. Right. So the reason why we hate Blair is because he believed that Thatcherism was correct. He believed that market fundamentalism was correct, that there was no place for the public realm in terms of the direction of the economy outside of just a very small amount of taxation on the rich people, in terms of like rich working people, not wealth tax or capital gains, for example, just like rich working people, like high earners, I guess is a better way of talking about it, which were then used to fund like anti-poverty programs through tax credits, which is whatever, it's fine.
Literally a
but he thought that the private sector was worth engaging in. He fed our NHS and the private sector through private finance initiatives. The same things happened to our schools as well. He did not bother regulating our financial sector and industries. It had been deregulated by Thatcher to allow the financial sector to gamble upon air and gamble and lose, which is why we had a financial crisis in 2008. Blair had the chance to rein these people in through liquidity requirements and capital controls and prudential regulation. He did none of these things. Therefore, 2008 happened. And people tried to blame 2008 as if it was the fault of the left for engaging in too much government spending. Right. We had had a government which essentially had an entirely like right-wing macroeconomic platform for the entirety of its existence between 1997 and 2008. And people decided that the problem with the financial crisis was that the government had spent too much money and that there were too many libraries in Wolverhampton, and not the fact that Margaret Thatcher and her cronies and Norman Lamont and John Major and all of these people, Michael Heseltine, had helped deregulate our financial sector so that they could essentially turn our economy into nothing and gamble on it and lose. And the people who paid the price, working people, the normal people in this country. And Blair could have stopped that, and he didn't. He was too busy taking money from the financial sector. He was too busy getting into bed with Murdoch press and the right-wing media and the rich people in this country who didn't want to properly inconvenience by nationalising their assets or properly impacting the wealth, the asset wealth, not the high earners, the people with the high asset wealth. And he also gave loads of bungs to middle-class people that didn't need them. Like, he allowed comfortable middle-class people who were already homeowners to get low-interest buy-to-let mortgages to become landlords on the cheap and take money away from working people who needed council houses that he kept selling off and didn't build any new ones. Like, the man was a Thatcherite. A man was a cold-blooded Thatcherite who it was a welfare... He was a Thatcherite who liked welfare and social reform. I guess the minimum wage was like the only kind of anti-Thatcherite policy, but even then he never properly gave powers back to trade unions. Like, outside of tax credits and the Equality Act, Blair did fuck all that was good for me. And obviously massively enriched it himself too. It's no wonder that he implemented very pro-landlord policy, because the man now makes all of his money from his landlord portfolio and from money that he gets from the Saudi Arabian government to lobby the current Labour Party to do policy that's against the interest of working people. Norman Lamont, yeah. And then on top of all of that, also a war criminal. On top of all of that, he's also a war criminal in Iraq. And we should never have gone into Afghanistan, but the Iraq war actually was illegal. So there are so many things to hate about Tony Blair, right? Cool, Sure Start was fine. The NHS worked really well. I wish it had been through state money rather than PFIs, but otherwise, interest rates might rise, which was a good thing. Help to Buy mortgages are terrible. Help to Buy was just pouring liquidity into a saturated housing market to inflate housing prices as a bubble for well-to-do middle-class people. That didn't help working-class people onto the housing ladder because they would never pass the affordability requirements given what interest rates were at the time. Like, Margaret Thatcher's Help to Buy was for middle-class kids to get onto the housing ladder 5 years early, and it pushed housing prices up for everybody else. Help to Buy is a terrible thing. It should never have been implemented. What we need was more supply, more council houses. That's what we needed. We needed more council houses, and we needed to not make the Bank of England independent so that we could maintain interest rate control from central government, to make sure that people could afford to have mortgages that weren't with cripplingly high interest rates from a high base rate. Like, the Help to Buy scheme was all it did was enrich middle-class people. It didn't help poor people onto the housing ladder, because all it did is help you with the deposit. All Help to Buy did was help you with the deposit. It didn't help you to get a salary, have an income that pushed you over the affordability requirements for the mortgage, given the interest rates were at the time. So the people with the high earners could get on the mortgage ladder, but get on it 5 years early. Help to Buy was a massive scam that was just a sop to middle class Tory voters.
There's a kind of systemic problem with this current incarnation of deregulated stakeholder-driven capitalism.
Yeah, I think the problem is, once you have very high levels of inequality, the rich are really, really, really rich, and increasingly the poor are very impoverished and the middle class are struggling. These guys have loads of money to lobby for the answers that they want.
Yeah.
And the only power that ordinary people really have in
Oh, we're talking about Right to Buy. Okay, well, I mean, Right to Buy I have a mixed relationship with. Like, Right to Buy is a reasonable policy if you can guarantee that all money used by Right to Buy sales goes into building more council houses than have been sold off, so you're increasing the inventory rather than selling off the inventory. But that's not what happened. We didn't build the council houses again. They just got sold off. Things went into the private rented sector, and now young people can't afford to live. Like, as simple as that. It was a policy that should never have happened without, like, literal funds that all the money went into that specifically for council house construction. All it was just a way of trying to create more Tory voters by giving a certain chosen few access to cheap assets that some people like us were never going to get access to. Like, which people who were born after 1990 have managed to get onto the housing ladder because of Right to Buy? Exactly, they're forbidden from doing it.
Response is taxation. It really is the only thing you can. It's the only power you have. You have a vote, and you have the power theoretically to tax the rich. It's the only protection that you have. If you look at most of history is a small, incredibly rich elite ruling over a vast majority of incredibly impoverished people, and that is the present truth in most of the world, and it was true in this country for most of history.
I think Farage and Tice's economic plan is fucking insane. They want to cut 5% from every government department. And essentially their plan is just, we'll do efficiency savings. Like, they don't even know what the numbers are. They've not looked at the books. They've not looked at any of the, like, the in-out budget requirements or what any of these departments do. So I get 5% off all of them. That will be able to throw tax cuts at people. It's insane. It's potty. It doesn't make any sense. Their NHS plan is to just spend money on vouchers for the private sector. And that has no spare capacity. It makes no fucking sense at all. Like, they had like a policy document. They had a policy document on how to deal with the energy crisis that literally described shale gas as buried treasure. Like, you don't need to know how unserious a political party is if you know that they describe shale gas as buried fucking treasure. Like, oh, come on. I hate to try and tell people to get real with politics, but that's just ridiculous shit. I've looked. This was in their contract with the people document. So if I've not watched the plan from today, but in their policy documentation they have on their website, which I have read, it was 5% spending cuts. They were going to reduce all government outgoings and public expenditure by 5%. If that's changed, with a manifesto due to be released, I think, tomorrow, then, you know, I will reevaluate it. I can't give you, like, the entirety of my opinions on the Reform UK prospectus until the manifesto is released. I mean, they've not said whether it will apply to ring-fenced departments or not. Again, they've not said anything, because these people don't have a serious plan for government, because they know they're not going to win. It's fine. You don't need to have a serious plan for government if you're not going to win. You need to let people know what your strategy would be. You don't need to have, like, a comprehensive government plan if you know you're not going to be in power. What you do need to know is use your policy prospectus to give the population an idea of where your loyalties lie, about the direction that your party is travelling and the ideology that you represent. You don't need to have this full government prospectus, and I get that. Reform UK don't need that, and that's fine. But this idea that they want to just slash public spending across every department, that would be their plan for a tax cut for everybody. It's like Liz Truss on fucking steroids.
Red, white, and
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's like Javier Milei type shit. Yeah, it was on Sky News today, yeah. We were going to watch it, but we ended up running out of time.
We stopped that for a period of time because we decided, no, we're going to make the rich pay fair level of taxes, and we're going to use that money to allow ordinary people to have housing and healthcare and food and education. We only were able to achieve that because of high levels of taxation of the very rich. And then in the 80s, we lost the argument. We lost the argument. And in doing that, we lost the only weapon that the poor and ordinary have ever had to protect themselves from the rich. And as soon as you take that away, listen, if you're Rishi Sunak and you have, according to the Sunday Times, £700 million wealth, you're going to make a passive income of £40 million a year. That's £1 million a week nearly, right? How are your kids going to compete with Rishi Sunak's kids to buy houses when he's making £1 million a week? You know, these guys will end up with all of the assets. That's the power of compound interest.
So let me ask you, like, you said earlier, the poor are getting poorer, the middle class are even struggling. You sort of reminded me of how, there was a policy that was floated at one point about, like,
I know, right? The fucking Gang of Four. What pricks.
higher taxations for over 80k, and that seemed to land really badly.
Yeah.
And we can talk about how some of those people on 80k are deluded about where they are in the social structure, but also, a lot of them are getting squeezed. So putting all of that aside, given that, why only 2% is your suggestion? Why not 5%? Why not 10%?
To be honest, well, it was 1%. 1% is our shout. And, I didn't suggest those numbers. That's the group that one of the groups I'm a member of, Patriot Millionaire, suggested 1%. And I think the reason why we asked that is, well, look, we're not going to get it. We are not going to get that. At the moment, 2-3 years down the line, as things get worse and worse, people might become more open-minded to things which at the moment are not considered acceptable, But at the moment, we're not going to get that. So we're trying to get something, and the truth is, these guys make 5% a year. If you were to tax the very rich 5% a year on their wealth, all that would do is stop them getting richer. 5% is the level of tax you
the Gang of Four was the SDP.
need to stop the rich slowly eating the middle class. If you allow them to get richer and richer and richer and richer, they will take everything. If you allow a certain group to become infinitely wealthy, then the rest of us will have nothing. You have to stop that. So, to be honest, realistically, I think if you want inequality to increase, you need to look at higher levels of taxation on the very, very rich, the extremely rich, because it's the only way to stop them from taking everything. What I think we need to do is explain to ordinary people, tax is not about making you poorer. Tax is about making you richer. If you don't tax the very rich, who do you think is going to own your house in 50 years' time? It's not going to be your kids. It's going to be their kids. Because they are getting richer and richer and richer. And what that means is taking an increased ownership of the assets, which you need.
So tell me about, the Labour Party are saying they're going to close nom-dom loopholes. They're also talking about ending tax breaks.
It's like what Gary said in his interview with Aaron Bastani, the very first one, right? Trying to talk about how, money is not resources. Money is the representation of the distribution of the resources, right? So, taxation, if it's predominantly on, working people, will mean the working people have fewer resources, right? And those who own resources, own the means of production, for example, will therefore gather resources to be able to make interest on those existing resources, right? So taxation that we remove on the super rich will compound in a way that makes inequality grow every year.
For private schools, is that going to move the dial at all?
It's not going to be enough. It's not going to be enough. Listen, we're sitting here today. Election's not going to be long. Very, very, very likely Labour win a majority and we'll have a Labour government. They're going to increase a very, very limited number of taxes on a very limited number of people. In some ways, it's targeted on the rich. Most people who send their kids to private school are, of course, richer people. Non-doms are overwhelmingly richer people. They're not going to raise much from that. They're not going to raise much from that because it's so specific. It's so specific. And realistically, when you talk about the very rich, their school fees are a drop in the ocean for them. They don't really care about their school fees. If you're making £1 million a week, like maybe Rishi Sunak's family is, how much is an extra 20% of their school fees? It's not much. Listen, it's movement in the right direction, but it's, it's 2 steps against a very strong current.
I'm just looking for some reason to be hopeful, just some reason to get up tomorrow.
I'll tell you one thing that gives me hope. I don't think this country's full of dickheads. I think if we can show them a way out of what we have, they don't want it to be this unequal. They don't want it to be this unfair. I think the problem is they're confused. They don't understand what's happening. They don't see the way out. And I think that if we can provide them with the understanding and the route towards a fairer settlement, then I think they will follow us. And I think it's the job of, people like us to make that clear message and that clear vision. And that's what gives me hope.
Well, in the spirit of that, let's do it. Let's put some sort of understandable policy that our listeners can write to whoever their MP is and say, do this. Absolutely do this. What could that be?
The first thing is you need to be reducing wealth inequality. And when I say wealth inequality, because I'm not talking about doctors and lawyers or God forbid, maybe even bankers. We're talking about individual families with wealth of £10 million or more. You need to be hitting them. You need to be hitting them.
And how would you do that? Inheritance tax? How would you do that?
Well, it's interesting you say inheritance tax. If you had high levels of inheritance tax on people with very, very high wealth, this would generate an enormous amount of money for the government. It would put a lot of money back. And not only that, it would stop all of the homes being owned by 25 families.
There was a really interesting idea that Matt Bruenig floated in a video of his that I watched. The video that I always tell everybody to watch, the one about desert theory in terms of economic philosophy. That's something that I always recommend people go and watch. He talks about this idea that, if you think that people should be able to do whatever they want with their money, then, you should abolish inheritance tax for the first generation only, and then have 100% inheritance tax everything after that. So your children, you can choose for them to inherit all of your money and get it tax-free, but they can't pass it down to anybody else. They've got to go and fucking spend it somewhere. I like that idea a lot, because it means that, second generation people can't just hoard wealth. They have to spend it and put it back into the economy. But it means that the people who think, well, you're taxing my income twice, can stop getting mad about inheritance tax.
And then your kids could buy a house. But, you know, I've been thinking for a long time about, am I going to do a video about inheritance tax? It's so demonized. It's so demonized. And
because it's made out that basically your parents in their sort of 3-bedroom semi-detached house are going to have it sort of hacked to pieces by the government, essentially. Like
what people don't realise is the reason your kids can't buy a house is because this tiny group of very wealthy families.
And also, for the vast majority of the time, houses are exempt from inheritance tax unless they're really fucking expensive ones.
Families are owning everything. That's why. And if you don't get the wealth away from them, we'll never get it back to you. Really, we need to rebrand tax. And you know, the debate, right?
Yeah.
Everyone, you know, Rishi Sunak, Keir Starmer, both acting like they absolutely hate tax.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And if we don't successfully rebrand tax, the rich will eat this country alive. It is the only way to stop that from happening. So, you know, this is what keeps me up at night. This is what I rack my brains about every day. How do we stop ordinary people from resisting calls on increased taxation for the super rich?
It is, you know, because Patriotic Millionaires is basically an organisation like that meme of Fry from Future.
You don't buy this idea that the working classes secretly all want equality. Reagan Thatcherism has directly led to large-scale greed and self-interest in society. I have no idea how you change that. It's not a class issue, it's an age issue, it's a generational issue. The people who were born into the Thatcher era, regardless of their class background, has absolutely, taken to heart the ideologies behind kind of like cultural neoliberalism of the Reagan and Thatcher era, the way that neoliberalism has shaped culture around it and shaped ideologies around it, you know, the base informing the superstructure, if you will. But the generations that have come after it and haven't been the beneficiaries have been the net losers out of the Thatcherite, Reaganite consensus of neoliberalism, absolutely despise it and really kind of are very kind of reactionary towards it, you know, in a good way, and I'll call a good way. So I think that, you know, everybody is going to be responsive to their own material conditions, and that's what differentiates between Thatcher's generation, the children of Thatcher, and, you know, the children of what probably have to say was to be the global financial crisis, right? People of our generation, Luke, have broadly reacted to that because, you know, our formative experience of the state of the economy is seeing the rich people and bankers destroy our economy, destroy our society, get bailed out, and then have no repercussions because of it. That's our overriding. I don't think that's what you think, but my overriding experience of living in the economy, of living in the UK economy, is watching rampant deregulation allow banks to get away fucking scot-free for destroying people's lives. And that's different to the homeowners and the beneficiaries of the public sector sell-off of the 1980s, who look at the booming economy that they inherited in the 90s and the early 2000s, who weren't as affected because they were already in like long-scale vocations by the time of the 2008 crisis. That's not their overriding thought about the history of the UK economy. Like, 2008 is a blip for these people, whereas it was, you know, life-changing. It fermented our opinions of capitalism itself, was our experiences of growing up in a post-crash world. Compared to those whose formative experiences were, you know, buying their council house or getting extra funding to get on the property ladder or getting a good buy-to-let mortgage from the Blair administration, for example.
Obama saying, please take my money.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
You know, it's a good organisation because, you know, people like Rishi Sunak often say, you know, if you tax.
I think it's certainly passed down to us. Hunter Lionheart. The Zoomers, less so. Because the Zoomers, a lot of them, you know, weren't coming of age during the financial crisis. They don't remember it very much. Because of the way in which our economy has been shaped by neoliberalism, there's a lot of hustle culture shit going on at the moment, right? So people will look at the misery of the economic misery of the world we live in right now, in a post-austerity world, in a post-coronavirus world, in a post-Ukraine war world, all in like the shadow of the financial crisis, which they never really experienced. There is definitely a subsection of Zoomers who've kind of imbibed the fact that if they don't succeed, it's their fault. They've been propagandized to by the Gary V's of this world. They've been propagandized to by the Patrick Bet Davids of this world, that it's all the market fundamentalism is why if you failed on that, then you failed personally, and you should only blame yourself rather than blaming government structures. And of course, the breakdown in the ability of governments to control the rich people who've been gifted the world through neoliberalism. Like, governments are very impotent to control these things. And I don't think young people like Zoomers have faith. I don't think they have faith that the government can do good things for them because it's failed to rein in the fucking like economy-destroying power of global capital and of corporations and of the super rich. So like it's the fake it till you make it kind of ideology might have passed down to at least some of them because of that. Like, do you know the generation in this country that has the lowest level of faith in the NHS and would most support moving towards a private healthcare system? It's young people. It's the under 25s are the people who would be most be open to the idea of privatized healthcare because they grew up like people who are under 25. They were 10. They were 10. When the Conservative Party came to power. They have no formative memories of what the NHS was like when it was properly funded. They don't remember what the NHS was like when it was the best healthcare service in the world. All they know is a healthcare service that doesn't work. Yeah, of course they'd be enamoured by the idea of bidding off the NHS. They must think it's fucking shit and that we're stick in the muds who've got this archaic, ancient healthcare system that fails everybody it tries to treat. Yeah, of course they would be open to a different healthcare system that might work better in retrospect. But we know, we've lived through a functional NHS, the best healthcare system in the fucking world, before the Tories just tried to destroy it. The best healthcare system in the world. Multiple institutions defined ours as the best healthcare service in the world. We know what it could be like. Zoomers, though, don't remember. They don't remember what it was like before it was shit. Plan working exactly as intended. Yep. 100%. But of course, young people still vote like massive majority for Labour, and a lot of them are coming around to the Green Party as well. We just have to make the argument that the NHS can be better than this.
And they'll leave. Well, here's a bunch of millionaires,
Thank
myself included.
Yeah. Take my money, please.
But you know what? Rich people very often oppose higher taxation for the richest. If we don't achieve this, look what's happening to this country now. Look what's happening. We are sitting in now, Great Britain, 2024. Come winter, half the country cannot simultaneously feed their kids and turn the heating on. And that will get worse. That will get worse. And go to places.
Also, the NHS getting better will help, but it's not getting better. It's getting more privatised. Wes Streeting doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. It's an existential crisis for the future of the NHS, allowing Wes Streeting to be fucking health secretary. Like, genuinely, like, this is an existential crisis for the future of this fucking health service. Like, this is why I just... Despite everything, despite the idea of destroying the Tory party forever, having them out of government for a generation, I just literally cannot support the Labour Party and will do my utmost to destroy them. I will do my utmost to prevent the Labour Party being in power for as long as possible. Because it's the death knell for the NHS if Wes Streeting gets his hands on it. His plans are fucking disastrous. They're terrible. He doesn't know what he's fucking talking about. It's a thing to wonder if younger generations may think of us saying the NHS was the best in the world is just us saying things were better in the old days, kind of old people talk. Maybe, I don't know. I need to talk to more Zoomers about it. I've not conversed with enough of them to be able to give you like an on-the-spot viewpoint of that. That's very true, Vicky, yeah. And also they will try and talk about the idea that car travel equals freedom. I'm like, well, no, it doesn't equal freedom. Like, you're still constrained over having your MOT and having your insurance and paying your road tax and having a driver's license. You don't need any of that fucking shit to ride the train. You just hop on the train and pay your train fare. Like, simple as that. Feels like the fall of the Roman Empire. It really does. Like, this country is like really fucked. The bicycle is a true freedom. Yeah, absolutely. It's why I go back. It's why I would always go back to my video about patriotism. Like, I think I called it "Do I Hate Britain" or something. And my point was that, like, lots of people have like this negative, like, this kind of self-deprecating view of this country and say, oh, isn't Britain shit? And I'm like, well, it is shit, but it's shit for a reason. It's shit because the government's failed. It's not shit for like abstract metaphysical reasons. It's shit because people made it shit, and we can undo that. But it will take radical action. It will take radical change. It will take the confidence and the vision and the desire to, you know, stand up to vested interests to undo the damage that's been done. And currently the Labour Party don't fucking want to. They don't have the ambition to create that change. And that's why we need immigration, William, absolutely, to try and make sure we have enough working age people to be able to fund the NHS properly.
Is like Brazil, India, South Africa. Look at what very unequal societies look like. The rich are living in luxury mansions surrounded by barbed wire. And personally, and I'm a wealthy person, I don't want my kids on either side of that barbed wire. And I don't think it's even in the interest of the rich, because what is happening now, this rapid increase in inequality, is destabilising society.
Yeah, I guess the reason I mentioned that is just, you were saying we need to rebrand tax, so instead of it being something that is to be looked down upon, that we all perceive as being a bad thing and negative in our life. Yeah. It's good vibes.
I appreciate you Zoomers coming in and giving me their perspective. I really appreciate you coming in. I will hope you guys, I'm glad you Zoomers are coming here engaged with politics. But if I was going to tell, if the Zoomers are watching, like Awen, if you're watching, still watching off that comment, right? Like, the one thing I want to impress upon people is that nothing is for certain. At the end of World War II, we had a quarter of our nation's wealth destroyed. The debt to GDP ratio was 25%. It was 200% rather, sorry. It was 200%. 25% of the country's wealth was destroyed in World War II. The debt to GDP ratio in 1945 was over 200%. Did Clement Attlee go, well, we can't do anything, the economy's screwed up, you've got to accept nothing? No. Clement Attlee said, we have the ability to be able to rebuild this country, and we built the NHS, we nationalised 20% of the economy, we used the power of the state to revolutionise our country and build hundreds of thousands of council homes, slum clearance, the end of the empire and the end of colonialism. We built, we finally actually built the kind of Britain that created the equal country that Gary Stevenson has pointed out here. It was the golden age of British society, where working people could get on in life and could aspire to things, whilst we weren't a pariah on the global stage because of empire, and inequality wasn't massively high. We're the most equal economies in the world in the post-war consensus period that Clement Attlee brought to this country. And that was because Clement Attlee was somebody who had vision. He had the ambition to be able to fix this country no matter what was happening. He stood up to people. He created a consensus that built the country to be the best it's ever been. And we could have a leader with vision to do that right now. And we've got fucking Keir Starmer, an empty suit of a man directed by the worst people in politics. You have the worst leader at the worst possible time. Clement Attlee would get deselected by the NEC today, exactly, yeah. But it's going to have to take standing up to the upper classes in this country because they want to protect everything. That's why I'm a populist. It's why I'm a populist. Like, the haves and the have-nots will have to come to blows eventually. The people who rely on assets, the bourgeois, will eventually have to feel like they are under threat from the power of the state and the power of the people. Otherwise, they won't give up their monopoly on political and economic power unless they feel under threat. That's why I'm a populist. It's why I believe in the popular power of people, the popular power of the proletariat against the bourgeois. Not because, I think that there's going to be a revolution that happens, but that level to which the bourgeois feel like to protect their existence, to protect their role in society, they must give up their monopoly on power is the only way that society will change for the better. Exactly, we need a new deal like the Marshall Plan, yeah. Whereas what we're looking at in the future, what we're looking at in the close future, is a fucking feudal system. That's the end result of unregulated neoliberal capitalism. It's just the recreation of feudalism. Little rentiers with their own little fiefdoms controlling everything that you do by extracting rents out of you, whilst you work pittance for nothing and can never afford to buy any assets.
Right? Like, that's what it is. It's really
You
good.
know what? I think you should view having tax the same way if you having an army. Seriously, if you don't have tax, how do you prevent yourself from the rich? You have an army to stop foreign armies from invading. You have tax to stop the rich from eating your kids alive.
It's like, it's a good thing to have. It's a nice thing to have. It's to be proud of.
It's a necessary thing. Look, at my heart, I'm a mathematician, I'm an economist, I'm a trader. I made millions of pounds betting our society is going to collapse, you know. I don't do what I do because I want to be Mahatma Gandhi or Mother Teresa. I don't want society to collapse. That's why I do it.
Do you know what? Society is good, isn't it? Like,
yeah, listen,
I feel like that's a note that's often lost.
When you put it like that, it seems evidently reasonable. I don't want society to collapse.
I've been to Mumbai and I've stayed in a luxury hotel, and outside there's like a family lying naked on cardboard boxes dying.
Yeah.
You know, that is what inequality looks like. You know, and I've read Charles Dickens, and I think some people lazily assume the kind of poverty that we see in places like Mumbai, that we see in places like Johannesburg, can't happen.
Well, absolutely, Owen. That's why I wanted to go out campaigning for the Green Party. It's why I've joined the Green Party, right? I believe the world can be better. I believe that, you know, we can build a popular movement with people involved. You know, it's early doors at the moment. Maybe I'll stay in the Green Party. Maybe I'll move some point in the future, depending on what the political trajectory is. But I can't sit here and do nothing. I can't just sit here and wait for history to happen to me. You know, we're a generation that's got to make history. We're the ones who are going to inherit the political role of our society. We're going to be the biggest voting cohort in 15 years' time. We've got to be the politically engaged ones right now, and we've got to build that movement now. Like, there's no time like the present. And I'm not going to sit around here sniping from the sidelines, sitting in my desk chair on my YouTube channel saying, well, everything's stupid, isn't it? No, I'm going to get out on the streets and try and win people over on policy. Yanis Varoufakis explains we're in a new feudalism. It blew my mind. Yeah, absolutely.
Happening.
Yeah.
It has happened. It's happening now. If we don't take action, it will happen again.
I recently came across a piece in the Financial Times that said that the UK had higher homeless levels than the States. And I think, you know, quite often we use the States as we're not as bad as them.
Yeah.
We use them as a barometer to make us feel more comfortable about what's going on. We're not like America, but we are. We are. The homelessness is part of it.
Look, and the thing is, you know, the homeless are only the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
For every one person out there on the streets, there's 20 or 30 that are worried about paying the rent.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I grew up in London. You know, obviously, I'm from my brother and my sister still live in London. My sister works in the arts. She works really hard. She can't pay the rent.
Yeah.
2 degrees. You know what I mean? And okay, some people say she shouldn't work in the arts. You know, if somebody working really hard on 2 degrees can't pay the rent,
something's gone wrong.
Yeah, and she's not. Listen, there'll be people listening that will be in that situation, that will know people in that situation.
Absolutely.
Gary, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Like, the housing crisis is like turbo fucked. Like, honestly, turbo fucked. It's crazy. As somebody who you stopped renting 2 years ago, like, the difference, like, when I stopped renting, like, the back end of 2021, 2022, when I stopped renting, the last rental payment I made was £400 for a 4-room flat share with bills included. £400 a month I was paying, inclusive of bills. Imagine, I was like 10 minutes away, 15 minutes away from the city centre of Manchester on that amount of money I was paying for the flat that I lived in. Like a 4-bed flat share. £400 inclusive of bills. Like, where the fuck is anybody getting rents for that price in 2024? They're like £800 not inclusive for the same thing. Like, how do people afford rents nowadays? I was having this conversation at the end of the party last night, and I was like, what the fuck is going on with rental prices in this country? Partner pays over £600 for a room, and I was in, like, close to the centre of Manchester as well. I can't imagine what it's like in London. The kind of, like, boxes that you have to live in, the fucking prison cell that you have to rent for like £1,000 a month.
Because I'm literally a communist.
£1,000 might get you a parking space, like Dr. Alan Statham. Well, a girl I used to date used to live on a boat. She was really nice. I've not spoken to her in years. I should check how she's doing. She was someone. She was a kind of very special person. I think that she had someone had a lust for life.
Literally a communist.
And she's somebody who just kind of decided to go and live on a boat one day. I think that's something I massively respect, and I enjoy spending time with her. Sorry, just thinking to myself there. If you're watching, Amelia, hello. €700 gets you a 3-bed flat in Spain. Yeah, I'd love to move to Spain. Take advantage of Pedro Sanchez whilst you're still there. I mean, a lot of young people nowadays are living out of fucking cars. It's crazy. Nick Robinson asking about people not being able to leave their parents' home until they're 30 seemed like a bit of like an Antoinette let them eat cake moment. Again, I will say, I've said it 1,000 times and I'll say it again, right? All of this kind of performative sadness over the fate of young people in this country. And I'm like, yeah, we tried to fucking tell you for 4 years. We tried to tell you for 4 fucking years to try and take account of our interests. And you said that we were politically uneducated and that we weren't worth talking to. And now you want to fucking cry about how bad it is for young people. I'm like, no, I don't need your fucking crocodile tears. I don't need your crocodile tears to tell us how bad things are for our generation. We fucking live here. We tried to fucking tell you. We tried to tell you, and you fucking ignored us. You ignored us and told us that we weren't relevant, and that we were young and naive, and that we didn't need our concerns listened to. And now they're fucking wring out their handkerchiefs talking about, oh, no, isn't it awful young people nowadays? We fucking told you. Yeah, absolutely. It's always going to stand up for the Palestinians, always have done, you know. Exactly, the radical leftist student politics. Please make things fair for young people. How radical. Yeah, they told us we were at fault, you know, fucking avocado toast and shit. Not working hard enough and spending too much money on phones and Netflix and coffee. That's the crazy thing, right? Is that I've mentioned this stat 1,000 times before, but I'll mention it all over again because I'm going to drill this factoid into your brain so you can repeat it for people who make these stupid arguments as well. In 2019, I think it was, or 2016, 2019, I remember around that time, during the era of this current Conservative government, for the first time ever in British history, the retired had more money, they were spending more money on non-housing expenditure, on non-housing consumption, than young people were, people under 25. The first time ever in history that young people spent less on non-housing consumption than the retired. That's how little money young people have. Again, even though he's a Tory, I highly recommend people go and watch Lord David Willett's lecture at the Royal Institute about young people not having a future. It's really, really informative. I mean, literally, who do you think's fault it was that became a nation of delivery drivers? Yeah, it's neoliberalism's fault. They stripped away our manufacturing, turned us into a service economy, took away our workers' rights and allowed us to become, on-demand labour, no benefits, casualised workforce shit. And again, like, automation is something that could be used for good. If we owned the automation collectively, we collectively owned the capital that went into the automation, we'd be able to collectively benefit from its proceeds and its productive allow those improvements in productivity and productive capacity. But it's going to be owned by a tiny minority of super rich people who will use it as a rentier method of extracting as much wealth as possible, and that's really fucking depressing. Again, there's a good future that we could create. We need to be there to be able to create it. But, our political system, our politicians' and vested interests get in the way. But if I didn't, respect the community or whatever, I would have fucking left by now already. I don't like living in this country. Why the hell would I like living in this country as a young person? Ireland's the very same. Ireland have a problem of population flight, of brain drain. Young people, because of how fucked the Irish economy is, because it's essentially just, 3 tax haven operators in a trench coat with enough housing for people to live in. Like, young people are just fucking off from Ireland. They're coming here. Like, you think things are bad for young people here. They're even worse in Ireland. That's why they're jumping across the Irish Sea to come live here rather than staying in their home country, because it's a country that doesn't work for them. I think YouTube's gone down, unfortunately. Who is winning, Russians or Ukrainians? I mean, probably Russians are winning slightly. I've not paid attention to to how close the race is, or how close the actual conflict is. I mean, I've always said we should be arming Ukraine to ensure that there is a necessity to be able to create a peace settlement. Because again, if Ukraine look like they're going to lose, Russia will never create a peace settlement. Yeah, it's just come back for me now. Yeah, I couldn't see your chat in my window. The West plan is to allow Russian interest rates to bleed them dry. I mean, how many Ukrainians have to die for that? I mean, I'm not a foreign policy expert, so I can't comment on what I would do. It's so sad that it's turned into a meat grinder, or it's a war of attrition. Yes, fucking miserable. If I were a leader of Israel, what would I do? Fucking end the occupation? Want talks to create a peace settlement along the 1967 borders and destroy all of the fucking settlements? That's what I would do. I probably would do, but it would be worth it. When does the Green Manifesto come out on Friday? You were in Rafa back when the war was 3 months old? Jesus. I suspect we're trying to foment civil war in Russia because we thought we had one after Yeltsin, but then we screwed them over and oh look, a strong man takes control. Get civil war going, it'll be a long time before Russia repairs itself and can challenge again. Well, I don't want that to happen. That's why, I want there to be some kind of resolution. I don't want there to be a massive breakdown in Russian society. It'd be fucking terrible for all the normal Russians who live in Russia. We are going through every manifesto as they come out. Like, we went all the way through Lib Dems today, so I think it's Tories tomorrow, so we'll definitely go through every manifesto in detail, at the very least. You saw with your own eyes Israel citizens blocking Egyptian aid? Yeah, of course they did. Zionism's fucking, like, brain disease. Can you line up the best grown-up Twitter takes the manifesto to rant as for us? Yeah, absolutely. Why is it the UN hasn't sent in peacekeepers to cool matters in Gaza yet? Because Israel would fucking kill them. I can only assume that the reason why the UN hasn't sent in peacekeepers is because Israel probably is outside of their real jurisdiction because they're not signed up to any international agreements, and you know what the IDF are like with killing innocent people. The UN would need Americans' approval to send in peacekeepers. That makes sense. Yeah, who can you believe? The only democracy in the Middle East, or your own lying eyes, yeah. Basically, the Lib Dem manifesto is identical to what Labour is saying, but there's no real nationalisation, more taxes on the rich, which is good, and there is rejoining the European Union single market. It's funny just how many policies the Lib Dems and the Labour Party have stolen off each other. Like, the Lib Dem manifesto was so similar to the Labour one, just with less, like, no New Deal for workers, no real nationalisation, but more taxes on the rich and greater access to EU single market. And proportional representation. And the Lib Dems do have a proportional representation in their manifesto, which Labour don't have. But other than that, they're all very, very similar in terms of the plans that they've got, like votes at 16 and all that kind of malarkey. Oh yeah, I mean, by real nationalisation, I mean bringing the tox under public control. Like, that's it, basically. Like, ending TOC franchise agreements. That's basically all you get out of the Labour nationalisation plans, but... yeah, it's all greater Russian chauvinism, isn't it? No worries, asparagus. I'll see you later. Right, I'm actually very tired, and this is my second stream of the day, so I'm gonna raid out now after I've done my 4 hours requisite content. I really appreciate everybody for sticking around and chatting with me today. It's been a pretty interesting. I didn't really cover much content. I had loads of videos to watch. I still have like another 4 videos I wanted to watch today, but it's really fucking late now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to raid you out, YouTube viewers, into My Left Eye. Go and subscribe. Go and say hi. Go and grab a membership. Go get a membership to My Left Eye. Go watch the stream and get your 99p memberships in for the My Left Eye. It's cheap as chips, cheaper than a can of Red Stripe. But yeah, go and say hello to My Left Eye and go and subscribe. Twitch viewers, I'm going to raid you out as well. Let's see who's available to raid into. I see Fawn has woken up for our subathon, so I can actually raid you into Fawn now, because it's been a while since I've raided into her. I mean, it's not exactly political content, but she's very nice and she'll chat with you. She's a genuine friend of the show. We've bonded over Pathologic and Magic the Gathering and left-wing politics, so...
Fucking neoliberalism.
Thank you, and for another very, very, very generous super chat, Captain Coconut. We appreciate you here. Well, as always, thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you very much for the bits, the subs, the messages, the super chats, and of course the memberships. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon for another stream at 2 p.m. As always, thank you very much. Take care, stay safe,